Most people watch the news, see the horror in the world, and think to themselves, I can't imagine how hard that is. And then they change the channel because it's too painful to watch. Advocates, on the other hand, step up every single day to sit right next to people feeling pain. They meet people on the worst days of their lives. Victim advocates have a really unique role in this world. My work is a constant love letter to victim advocates to sit with people in the depths of hell. For their bravery, I want to thank every victim advocate on this planet. And although my role as a trainer is to teach advocates skills and theories that they may use in the line of duty, I often find that the advocates teach me much more. This podcast is my nod to the brilliant people who've attended my workshops and opened my eyes to new ideas every day. I'm Dr. Kate Watson, and this is Advocate Insights.
Welcome to Advocate Insights. I'm Dr. Kate Watson, and I have another wonderful guest with me today. Today, we're joined by Rebecca Berry, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Domestic Violence Network. So, Rebecca, what can you tell us about you?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Thank you for having me. I would say first that I am an educator. My background is in education as well as human development, so sociology, psychology, and anthropology. I'm very passionate about relationships and behavior. So looking at the why of things. So not just looking at the what of behavior, but looking at the why, which brings in a trauma-informed lens, looking at trauma and the brain and how the brain is impacted by trauma, and therefore how we then kind of exist in the world through this lens of trauma or a brain that has been traumatized, and how do we kind of find our own healing through and despite experiencing trauma. So those are some of my passions. I personally love houseplants. I have a lot of really amazing houseplants, and I like to go on walks and, take naps. So that's a little bit about me.
Now that you've mentioned houseplants, it's occurring to me that you're seeing me. No one else will see us, but you're seeing me on screen in a house that I've barely moved into. And these shelves behind me are just begging for a houseplant, aren't they?
I would pluralize that and say begging for some houseplants. Yes.
They're screaming for some living thing on there.
Yeah,
So, all right,
absolutely.
that'll be my next move. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your introduction. You said something about how you are interested in how people exist in their environments through this trauma lens.
Yeah.
And I thought that's like a great way of putting it, because we sometimes mistakenly believe that everybody's experiencing the world the same way. And you're bringing up that one of the things you really care about is understanding the many different lenses through which people experience the world. And I don't know a lot about you, but we did chat once before. And what I learned is that, you care a lot about meeting unique needs of people, and not this one size fits all kind of approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. And I think that, looking at people as individuals behaving a certain way, but then also looking at individuals in a group or in a society or community that all glean from each other's behavior. And so I think there's definitely so much uniqueness, of course, inside of every individual, but there's also so much interconnectedness as well within individuals and inside of groups. And so I am passionate about both things. And I think that really before we even tap into, the topic for today, I would love to just provide a couple of little definitions as to what trauma is. I think that sometimes the misconception or the assumption is that trauma occurs outside of us, that there's an event that happens and that is the trauma. And so I wanted to just provide, if I could, two definitions for what trauma is that I like to use when I am training. So if that's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and read the two definitions. So the first definition that I like to use is by Dr. Gabor Mate, and he says that trauma is not the bad things that happened to you, but trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. And so looking and shifting that lens from external event to internal reaction or internal dealing with, in a sense, of that trauma. So that is one definition that I like to use. And then the other definition is by Dr. Hilary McBride. And she says, trauma is defined by how a person experiences an event, not by the event itself. This occurs when something negative or unexpected happens, and it leaves us feeling confused, overwhelmed, and powerless. And so really tapping into that shift from an external event to an internal reaction or an internal coping with something external. And that is what trauma is. So shifting and moving forward as we discuss the topic of the day, I wanted to make sure that we could all kind of have a shared understanding of trauma.
Yeah. I'm thrilled that you did that because, listen, the audience here is largely victim advocates, family advocates, child advocates, and I'll bet every single one of them would bet their life savings if they could define trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I'll bet they all just learned something from those definitions.
Yeah.
And I think we run a risk sometimes, and this is not just our field, but really in all professions. We run the risk of getting a little too comfortable that, like, I know what I'm talking about. I know these things. I've been doing this a long time. And yet there is always a new way of looking at something that can be really helpful. And so I'm so glad you did that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that, even when we talk about being trauma informed, I like to remind people that no one is ever fully trauma informed. We just become more and more trauma informed. And in that, there's always room for growth. I think that we can be lifelong learners inside of this, yearning to become more and more trauma informed, but we'll probably never get there, and that's okay.
Right. It's like when people say I'm culturally competent. I'm like, well, it's not a destination that you arrive at.
Right.
It's something that you're always striving for.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, you helped me when we did a little planning call, and you mentioned the topic of self-care, which I think is another one of those phrases that gets thrown around as if we all know what that is, right? We all know self-care. I love when people say, I got to do my self-care. And I'm like, what does that even mean that you're going to do it? Like, is it a checklist item for you? I'm always wondering what people mean by that, and that it might be okay if it means different things to different people. What else can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that with self-care, unfortunately, I think that there has been, a lot of whitewashing of what self-care looks like. I think that self-care has become, another one of those buzzwords that's really fun to say and, really fun to talk about. And I think that it can sometimes be looked at in such a minimal way or a really flippant way. But when we think about self-care, I typically would say, oh, self-care, I've seen people, okay, that's spa day, that's massage and nails and facials or getting a new haircut or, something that is primping you and priming you for you to feel more like yourself, whatever that looks like. And sure, that can be an element of self-care. But when we really look at accessibility for self-care, we really want to think about equity. We want to think about what access looks like. And so some people may not have the access or the desire to want to go and spend $120 at a spa for a facial. That may not even be in the realm of something possible for folks. And so that doesn't actually mean that self-care is now unattainable. I think that for self-care, for example, we really can look at not just the things like hair, skin, and nails, but really looking at what does our no sound like for self-care? How many things are we asked to do that we actually don't want to do, that we feel obligated to do, that we feel pressured to do, that we feel like we are guilty if we don't do it, but we don't have the capacity? Being able to say no is an act of self-care. Really looking at other elements like getting outside in nature. We will talk about wellness in a sense, but really recognizing that another aspect of equity is access to parks, access to green space, access to places where folks can get outside of their apartment, their house, their community, and still be in community, but in nature, is a really important aspect of self-care and a really important aspect of equitable self-care. And so those are some examples that I can kind of toss out regarding self-care.
Yeah. I think the concrete examples help as you talk about, access to green spaces and things like that. I've often said I'm not fully satisfied when we describe self-care as an action. That seems popular, and I feel a little bit alone in this one. But I guess I think of self-care as more like this adoption of a mindset that you matter and that you have value and that yourself, you are important and you should be considered in decision making. And I imagine that mindset is also something that's difficult for some folks to access if society or if our culture is constantly telling you that you don't matter or that you're not valuable to us. And when that message is all over the place, I imagine self-care is really hard.
Absolutely. I think that, as a Black woman, as a woman who identifies as queer, sitting inside of my body and knowing that society has said that the two of many identities that I sit under don't matter. When we think about anti-Black racism in America, when we think of anti-Black racism really inside of the world that we live in, recognizing that as a Black woman, we know that the pay gap is there. We know that violence against Black women is higher and more susceptible. Even looking at domestic violence, that Black women are 3 times more likely to experience domestic violence than their white counterparts. And so recognizing that violence and harm against the Black body is and has been a construct and a creation of this country that continues on today. And so what does it look like despite society telling, for me as an example, as a Black queer woman, how do I still access joy? How do I still access healing? How do I still access wellness? So while I'm waiting for systems to change, while I'm being a part of systemic change through the domestic violence network, there are still ways that I can, in my body, access self-care. And it isn't just for relaxation. It isn't just for that spa day to have a day off, quote unquote. It is for survival. It's necessary. It is vital for survival to be able to say, like, your words, I matter, and I'm being told that I don't matter, but I know intrinsically that I matter. I know who I matter to. And really getting in that space where you can do things for yourself every day to remind yourself that you matter. And for me, an aspect of self-care is therapy, which should be a right in this country. And unfortunately, it's a privilege. But through therapy, kind of having some tools that I utilize, which are meditation and journaling and movement. And so I have ADHD. And so if I don't visually see it, it doesn't exist. So I've got Post-its around my house that say, did you meditate today? Did you eat today? Did you journal today? Did you, and it helps to remind me that those are things that are very practical that I can do to get in that pattern of like reminding myself that I matter, reminding myself that I deserve care, not just because I'm being told that I don't, but because I'm a human, because I exist in my body, I deserve care and wellness and access to wellness.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you're giving hope to the listeners that like it's possible, because I know I was starting to say, well, this must be really hard if the whole world is telling you that you don't really matter and you don't really have value. It must be so difficult when then the other message is you should take a day off and go treat yourself to a manicure.
Right.
It's like that isn't going to solve the problem. But you're helping us, Rebecca, you're helping us know that there is hope here. It isn't all so difficult. It's not always this uphill battle, but you've found ways to take good care of yourself. What else would you like the audience to know about that hope that is out there?
Yeah, I think, currently in launching this new community-wide plan through the Domestic Violence Network that focuses specifically on the disproportionate rates of how Black women are impacted by domestic violence, we are creating lots of trainings and programming and advocation for Black women in various aspects surrounding advocacy and systems. What does it look like to navigate DCS when you have an open domestic violence case? Or what does it look like to navigate, a protective order, or sharing your, sharing your story on the stand when you have to testify? How do we help to create some elements where folks are supported? And in this community-wide plan launching, really looking at not just this generational trauma that we have seen get passed on. So one of the big questions that we ask in our organization is, our mission is to change the culture that leads to domestic violence. And so what is the culture around domestic violence for Black women and for the Black community? And a lot of it is that we had some listening sessions and we had some conversations about, what do you know about domestic violence as a Black woman inside of this identity of a survivor, or an identity of, a trans woman, or an identity of an executive director of an advocacy network? So what do you know about domestic violence? What has it been taught to you? Different questions like that. And we notice over and over, especially for those who were survivors, was, well, I didn't know that what I was experiencing was domestic violence. I just thought this is how relationships go. And so really helping to provide language and examples for folks of what domestic violence looks like, and recognizing that, Black women and the Black community, despite the harms and despite the societal, historic, and current ways of harm, that there is a huge amount of resilience. There is a huge amount of maintaining and moving forward. And, we're not just looking at this strong Black woman trope of, oh yeah, Black women can carry everything and Black women are so strong. And sure, that's true because we've had to be. And also, Black women are soft, and Black women rest, and Black women experience pleasure, and Black women can, take the opportunity to exist in their bodies simply because. And So looking both at the resilience factors, but we also don't forget about the joy factors, this generational joy that has been passed down, this generational creativity, generational love and support. So we're not just seeing this striving Black woman, we're also seeing this creative and flourishing and blooming Black woman. And that all of that encompasses the Black community, all of that encompasses the culture of domestic violence. And so if we could help provide more language and look at that resilience, but also remind each other of that joy and that creativity and that blossoming despite the harms, we can move towards healing in a lot of different ways. And so I hope that answered your question in a long-winded way.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about how these are the stories that need to be told. And I'm also thinking, Rebecca, when you introduced yourself, I guess I'd have to go back and listen, but I think the first thing you said about yourself is that you're an educator. And by what you've just told me, I think you stand out more as an amazing learner, that you're willing to approach your work and learn constantly. Because I was listening to you say, like, here's what we found, and here's what we found, and here's what we found. And I was like, I wish there were more people out there who showed up every day at work saying, what can I learn today? And you seem like you're doing that really well.
I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah. I think of myself as an expert in my body, and I think of each person as an expert in their bodies. And so when we come together, we are both experts and learners. And so I think trying to approach this work and just approach lots of things, that way can be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd like to have you on another time just to ask you over and over again, what else have you learned? What else have you learned? What else? And I don't care if it goes in 25 different directions. It would just be fun to have an episode about like the things we learn in our work.
Yeah, I would love that. I so appreciate it, and just this opportunity to come and share a little bit about what we're so excited about and working so hard towards with the community at DVN.
Is there anything that you haven't said that you really would like to make sure you convey before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think just finally really looking at, I know we generally talked about self-care and as an aspect of wellness, but I really, really enjoy and appreciate the local organization here in Indianapolis, and it's called the Centers of Wellness for Urban Women, and we call it CWU for short. And CWU is just a really amazing local organization that really focuses. Their vision is every urban woman will create a culture of wellness, and their mission is to empower women and their families and urban communities to take action in their health and well-being through education, advocacy, prevention, and care. And so their website is cwuonline.org, and they provide a lot of really beautiful and really full examples of their 7 dimensions of wellness, what each of those elements are, and how one might access those, especially a woman inside of an urban community. And so I would love to maybe next time dive into more deeply this aspect of wellness, and see how we can provide maybe some more information for folks.
It's a great teaser. I think what will happen is people will listen to this and they will say, I would love to hear more about that. I'm also thinking, as someone who lives in Philadelphia, but I maybe once or twice a year find myself in Indianapolis, it may be worth swinging by just to thank them for the work that they do, because you've told me that it's pretty powerful stuff. So thank you for sharing that. I will happily put that website, a link to it from our website, and make sure that we lift them up as much as we can. But otherwise, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining. To the listeners, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, send me a message at kate@advocacyacademy.org. That's Kate, Kate, at advocacyacademy, like it's all one word, .org. And then check us out next time when we explore more advocate insights.